The Story of the Children of Lear, Part 3. At last the 300 years had passed, and the 4 children of Lear, now transformed into swans, awoke one morning with an overpowering urge to head towards the rising sun. They took off from their lake and headed towards the Sea of Moyle, which lay between Ireland and Scotland. When the people of Erin saw them go, they were very sad, and a law was passed meaning that no man across the length and breadth of Ireland could harm or kill a swan. The Sea of Moyle was unpredictable and wild. Even in the summer, storms could blow up out of nowhere, and in the winter, curtains of icy sleet and rain blew down from the frozen north. It was a wretched and miserable place for the 4 children to spend the next 300 years. They had not been there very long when a terrible storm blew up from the north, and the 4 children, caught unawares, were blown in different directions as the sea churned around them and the wind howled. When at last the storm subsided, Fionnuala found herself on the shore of an island, but there was no sign anywhere of her brothers. She called to them, but they didn't answer. She began to sing, and her sad song echoed out across the sea, carried by the still blustery wind, but there was no reply. 3 days Fionnuala sang, but at the end of the 3rd day she heard on the breeze an answering call, followed by another and another, and to her great relief her 3 brothers finally appeared in front of her. They were much battered and dreadfully injured, but they had found a way home. Fionnuala's singing had reached the ears of the sea god MacManaman MacLeish, and it was his island, the Isle of Man, that they were all resting on at that time. Moved by their plight, he caused a great cave to appear on the western shores of the island, and it was here that the 4 children of Lear lived out the next 300 years. But at last a morning came when once again they felt the urge to fly away, and they left the cave and flew westwards towards the setting sun. They flew over an island that was much changed. The stories of the children of Lear were long forgotten now, and told by very few, and remembered by even fewer. At last they arrived on the western coast, where the mighty Atlantic's waves pounded against the shore, and they ended up on an island called Inishgora. There they lived, still with telling each other their stories and singing their songs. Time passed, and Ireland continued to change. A man from the east arrived telling stories of a carpenter who changed the world. And that's why one day a monk, a follower of this man, whose name was St. Patrick, arrived on the shores looking for somewhere where he could contemplate God all by himself. The monk's name was Camog, and he set up a cell there on the Isle of Inishglora. One day, when Camog was busy fishing, he saw the swans in the distance, and as they drew nearer to him, he was astonished to hear them talking in a human voice that he could understand. Somewhere at the very back of his mind, a story told to him by his grandmother when he was a small boy came back, and he called out to the swans and asked them if they were indeed the children of Lear. He hadn't expected them to answer, but when they did, they told him that it was true, and that they were the 4 children of the King Lear, who had been turned into swans by their wicked stepmother. Camog and the 4 swans became great friends. But although he lived on the island alone, from time to time he did need to travel back to the mainland. And because he travelled back, he couldn't help but tell people of the 4 swans that he had discovered there, and in particular the beauty of their singing. Word began to spread. Now, one day a boat arrived, and on it that there was a messenger. The messenger told Camog that the King of Ulster was to marry the daughter of the King of Munster, and that as a gift for his bride-to-be, he wanted the singing swans. He was going to send over a troop of soldiers to capture them. Camog was horrified, but the messenger would not take no for an answer, and the next day another boat arrived with a whole troop of soldiers inside it. They captured the 4 swans and they placed golden chains around their neck. Then they lit a beacon fire on the shores of Inishglora so that the people on the shoreline could start to celebrate the forthcoming wedding now that the swans were captured. When the people on the mainland saw the flames from the beacon fire, they began to ring bells, and at that moment the curse that had held the 4 children in the form of swans was broken, and to the horror of the soldiers, the children were transformed once again into human form. Only now they were no longer children, but they were very, very weak and old. They fell to the bottom of the boat, and Camog ran forward and put his arms around them. They were so weak they could barely speak, but with their dying breaths, the 4 children begged Camog to bury them there on the shoreline, standing in the old-fashioned way with their arms around each other facing the setting sun. And this he and the soldiers did. Sadly, the soldiers rowed back to the mainland and went away to tell the King of Ulster of what had happened when they had tried to capture the swans. Camog was lonely, and that one night, as he fell asleep, he was awoken by a sound outside. He went out to see a full moon in the sky, and there, flying in front of it, were 4 swans. And as he watched, the swans transformed from birds into laughing, dancing, playing children, and they rushed off into the west and the land beyond the setting sun to join their fathers forever. And that is a very sad, I'm afraid really quite long story of the children of Lear. It's one of my very, very favourites, and I really do hope that you've enjoyed it too.